When the alien armada entered the solar frontier, they expected panic, resistance, and the familiar rhythm of conquest. Instead, they found silence. No desperate fleet formations, no proud final stand, no trembling negotiations, just a single human command station watching them arrive and doing almost nothing. To the invaders, it looked like surrender. To the human commander, it was the opening move of a plan so cold, so patient, and so completely outside alien doctrine that by the time they understood it, the war was already over. Because humanity had not prepared to win the battle. Humanity had prepared to erase the invasion. The first alert did not sound like an alarm. It felt like the air itself hesitated. Aboard Helios Gate, the outermost human command fortress anchored beyond Neptune's orbital drift, the night shift moved with quiet precision. Lights dimmed, voices low, screens steady. Everything operated within expected parameters. The kind of calm that only exists when systems have not failed in years. A cup of coffee still steamed beside a navigation console when every display flickered. Half a second, too short for panic. Long enough for trained minds to notice something impossible had just happened. Lieutenant Cale Arden lifted his eyes slowly. His fingers hovered over the sensor interface, but he didn't touch it yet, because the data was already changing. "Confirm signal disruption," he said calmly. No one answered. Not because they didn't hear him, but because every eye in the room had shifted to the main projection wall. A red line appeared at the edge of the system map, then another, then dozens, then hundreds, spreading, bleeding inward. Multiple warp signatures detected. Sector 9, one analyst began, but her voice faltered as the counter accelerated beyond comprehension. Count rising, 80, 300, 2,000. The system tried to isolate targets. It failed. Instead, it did something far worse. It painted entire regions of space red. Kyle stood up slowly now. "That's a rendering error." "No," another voice whispered from deep systems control. "That's saturation." And then the elevator doors opened. No announcement, no urgency. Commander Mireia Sol stepped onto the deck. Her presence didn't raise voices. It lowered them. She didn't ask what was happening. She looked at the screen once and understood everything. That changed the deck. "Report," she said. Kyle swallowed, but his tone stayed sharp. "Massive incursion, unknown origin. Numbers exceed tracking capacity. System auto-classifying as..." He stopped, because the system had just updated. A new label appeared across the entire projection. No one moved, no one spoke. Even command forgot to speak. Mireia stepped closer to the display. Her eyes didn't follow individual markers. She studied the pattern, the formation, or rather, the absence of one. "They're not deploying," she said quietly. Kyle blinked. "Ma'am? They're arriving," she corrected. And that distinction unsettled something deep in the room. Because invasion fleets deployed. They didn't simply appear. "They're not forming attack vectors," another officer added. "No flanking structures, no forward spearhead, no defensive grid." "Then what are they doing?" someone asked. No one answered immediately, because suddenly everything looked different. Mireia crossed her arms behind her back, still calm, still precise. "Open long-range channels. Protocol suggests defensive posture first," Kyle said carefully. "I didn't ask for protocol." A pause. Then, "Yes, Commander." Channels opened. Static filled the room. Then silence. No signals returned, no negotiation request, no threat broadcast, no declaration of war, just presence, massive, overwhelming, unmoving, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from hesitation, but from certainty. "They're waiting," Kyle said. Mireia nodded once. "Yes, what are they waiting for?" This time, she didn't answer, because she already knew, and the answer was worse than any attack. "They think we've already lost." The words landed heavier than any alarm. That answer landed harder than expected. Across the deck, hands hovered over controls that had no clear purpose anymore. Weapons meant nothing against something you couldn't count. Defense meant nothing against something that didn't need to rush. And fear. Fear began to settle in the silence, but not in Mireia Sol. She stepped forward, placed her hand on the central command interface, and gave the first order of the war. "Stand down all forward defense systems." The room froze. "Ma'am," Kale's voice was careful now, too careful. "You heard me. Full stand down leaves the inner system exposed. Yes, that includes Earth. I am aware." No one moved. No one confirmed. Because this wasn't strategy. This was surrender, or at least that's what it looked like. Mireia turned slowly to face the room. Her expression didn't change. "Execute." 3 seconds passed, then 5, then standing down defense grid. One by one, systems powered down. Weapon arrays went dark. Shield relays disengaged. The outer line of humanity vanished. And out there, the red spread continued. Unstoppable, silent, watching, and for the first time, the invaders began to move. The alien fleet crossed the boundary of the outer system without resistance. No mines ignited, no interceptor wings launched, no warning barrage lit the dark. To the invaders, that silence meant exactly what they believed it meant: submission. On the command bridge of the leading alien dreadnought, the officers of the Varkesh Dominion watched human defenses disappear one layer at a time. Their war doctrine had predicted panic, fragmentation, desperate regional resistance, maybe even symbolic heroics meant only to preserve pride. But this was cleaner than conquest. This was collapse. Supreme Executor Tariv Kol stood beneath a suspended tactical sphere the size of a shuttle pod, his armored silhouette motionless, while thousands of human markers went dim across the system display. His species had built an empire by understanding pressure. Overwhelm the enemy, deny them rhythm, break their timing before they break yours. And humanity, apparently, had broken on sight. "Outer batteries have powered down," said one of his signal interpreters. "No pursuit patterns. No hidden flanking signatures, no retreat convoys detected in military corridors." Tarev narrowed his eyes. "No retreat? No organized military withdrawal, Executor." That should have pleased him. Instead, it bothered him, because wars obeyed sequence. Fear, motion, response. Humans had skipped response. What unsettled them most was not human weakness, his adjutant said quietly, studying a secondary grid. "It is that they are making no effort to be understood." Tarev said nothing, because he felt it too. The quiet was wrong. Back on Helios Gate, the human command deck remained dim, ordered, almost unnaturally steady. Screens now displayed the inner solar map with thousands of red signatures advancing in waves so vast that no tactical software could pass them into useful formations. The system tried anyway. It kept assigning labels: strike cluster, heavy carrier mass, siege lattice, deep escort spine. Then it stopped. There were too many. The screen simplified them into one growing stain. Lieutenant Kyle Arden stood rigid beside the command rail, watching the enemy consume astronomical distance with slow, unhurried certainty. He had served under Commander Mireia Sol for 6 years. He had seen her hold orbital lines under impossible pressure, seen her turn losing engagements by finding details other officers ignored. But he had never seen her do this. She was not building a defense. She was dismantling one. "Forward moons have confirmed evacuation," said Operations Chief Lena Korv, her voice low but controlled. "Europa depots empty, Titan reserves stripped, Mars relay stations entering Ghost Protocol." "Civilian lanes?" Mireia asked. "Already rerouted below trace threshold. Industrial caches. Burned or moved." Kyle turned. "Ma'am, with respect, if we keep clearing the board like this, there will be nothing left to protect." Mireia looked at him only for a second. "That is the point." No one answered immediately, because every officer on that deck had been trained to preserve assets, preserve routes, preserve infrastructure, preserve options. But Mireia was not preserving. She was denying. One by one, she was removing every object the Dominion expected war to revolve around. Fuel, transit anchors, repair yards, harvest stations, docking rings, communication beacons, habitats large enough to seize and use. She was turning an entire star system into something the Varkesh had never trained for. A battlefield with no battlefield. They came here assuming scale would win this for them, Mireya said, returning her gaze to the projection. Their logistics were designed for impact, not endurance. They projected force. They did not prepare to feed it. Kyle frowned. That's an assumption. No, she said softly. It's a reading. She enlarged the enemy sphere. Dense red clusters pulsed at the front, but the rear sections were thinner than they should have been for a sustained occupation force. Their mass was concentrated in crushing advance elements, command carriers, siege hulls, intimidation platforms. An invasion made to be seen, not lived through. They expected to arrive over a functioning system, Mireya continued. Ports intact, resources untouched, orbital stores waiting to be taken. A population shocked enough to preserve the infrastructure for them. Lena exhaled slowly. But we're emptying everything. We're removing the war they came prepared to fight. That changed the deck. For the first time, the officers were no longer looking at the enemy. They were looking at her, because suddenly the silence had shape, and shape meant intent. Kyle stepped closer to the tactical rail. Even if that works, we're still letting them into the inner system. Yes, into orbit. Yes, into Earth's shadow. Mireya finally turned to face him fully. And when they get there, she said, they will discover that distance means nothing when there is nothing left ahead, nothing left behind, and nothing in between willing to keep them alive. The words settled cold over the room. No one moved. Every rifle stopped, at least in the minds of the officers who still thought like soldiers first, because this was no longer about firepower. It was about patience, mathematics, and a terrifying kind of restraint. The enemy advanced for 11 straight hours. By the 12th, they passed the abandoned ring stations around Saturn. By the 14th, they breached the dead commerce lattice near Jupiter and found it empty. By the 16th, they began broadcasting. The first message arrived across all open channels in a language shell quickly translated by Helios Gate's diplomatic engine. Kyle looked up from the decoded line. That's not a negotiation. No, Mireya said, it's appetite. Do we answer? She was silent for a moment. Then she gave the second order that made the deck colder than the first. Transmit this. Humanity acknowledges your arrival. No organized resistance will be offered. Several heads turned at once. Lena stared. Commander, send it. That confirms surrender. Mireya's expression never shifted. No, it confirms what they need to believe. That answer landed harder than expected. The message went out, and on the command bridge of the Varkesh flagship, Supreme Executor Tarev Kol watched the human text resolve above the tactical sphere. No organized resistance will be offered. One of his officers released a restrained breath that sounded almost like triumph. Another gave a low, predatory nod, but Tarev did not, because the wording was too careful. No organized resistance, not no resistance, not peace, not surrender. A statement designed to close one door while leaving others invisible. Executor, his adjutant said, permission to begin occupation sequencing? Tarev kept staring at the human message. They are teaching us how they want to be read, he said. And species that accept defeat do not edit their own humiliation. The bridge remained silent. The Dominion officers were superior by every measurable doctrine they possessed. Mass, armor, fleet depth, siege output, psychological coercion. But humans were now doing something their simulations hated. They were creating ambiguity under pressure, and ambiguity delayed clean conquest. Tarev issued his response. Advance in full, maintain compression formations, no dispersed harvesting, no unsanctioned landings, no asset detachment beyond command radius. His officers stiffened. Executor, one said carefully, such caution against a collapsing species may be unnecessary. Tarev turned his head just enough for the officer to understand he had made a mistake. "Then be grateful," Tarev replied, "that I still prefer unnecessary caution to historical embarrassment." Back on Helios Gate, Mireia watched the enemy tighten their formation. A small thing, almost invisible, but she saw it, and so did Kyle. "They didn't relax," he said. "No, they're suspicious." "Good." He stared at her. "Good." "Yes," said Mireia. "Suspicion makes them hold together. And if they hold together, they starve together." No one answered immediately, because suddenly everything looked different. This had never been about scaring the invaders. It had been about guiding them, condensing them, drawing a massive force deeper and deeper into a human system that was no longer a source of victory, but a sealed chamber. A trap not built from explosives, but from certainty. Mireia lifted one hand and zoomed the map inward toward the inner planets. Earth glowed blue, Mars dark red. Between them, countless hidden vectors remained invisible to all but the highest command authority. Prepared routes, silent caches, buried engines, gravitic distorters, fail-safes, sacrifices. The Dominion believed they were entering the heart of human civilization. They were not. They were entering the part humanity had already decided it could afford to lose. And that was the one thing no empire had ever prepared for. By the 20th hour, the Dominion began to notice something they could not categorize. Not resistance, not deception, something worse. Absence, entire orbital lanes, gone, refueling corridors, empty, gravitational anchors, offline. Even debris fields had been cleared. Supreme Executor Tarev Kol stood before the tactical sphere as new reports streamed in faster than his officers could stabilize them. "Executor, forward fleets are reporting energy inefficiencies. Clarify. They are compensating for missing gravitational slings. Expected velocity gains are not occurring." Another officer spoke. "Long-range harvesting scans returning negative. No usable matter clusters in operational range." A third, "Secondary fleets requesting redistribution of supply priority." Tarev raised a hand. Silence. He expanded the projection, zooming outward, then inward, then across multiple vectors. And that was when he saw it. Not what was there, what wasn't. "They removed the system," he said quietly. No one understood at first. What unsettled them most was not the loss of resources. It was the realization that this was intentional. Back on Helios Gate, Mireia Sol stood unmoving as the first signs of strain appeared exactly where she had predicted. "They're slowing," Kyle said. "Not yet," she corrected. "They're realizing." That changed the deck, because realization meant the window was closing. "They'll adapt," Lena added. "Yes, they'll split their forces, spread out, search for reserves." Mireia shook her head. "No. Why not?" "Because we already made that decision for them." Kyle frowned. "How?" Mireia enlarged the enemy formation, still compressed, still dense, still operating under centralized command. "Fear and danger are not always the same thing," she said. "They don't fear us." "No, but they fear uncertainty." That answer landed harder than expected. "They don't understand this battlefield," Mireia continued, "and species that don't understand terrain stay close to command." Kyle's expression shifted. "They're holding formation because they think we're hiding something." "Yes, and we are." No one spoke, because now the silence had teeth. Hour 23. The first Dominion vessel shut down. Not destroyed, not attacked. It simply stopped. Energy collapse. Internal reserves drained faster than projected. Support fleets attempted redistribution, but the math no longer worked, because the system they had entered no longer supported scale. "They're bleeding efficiency," Lena whispered. Mireia didn't respond. She was watching something else. A subtle shift, a hesitation, tiny delays in movement between fleet clusters, command latency increasing. "They're feeling it," Kyle said. "No," Mireia replied softly. "They're denying it." On the Dominion flagship, tension had replaced certainty. "Executor, We recommend controlled expansion. We need resources. No. Remaining compressed will accelerate depletion. Yes. Silence. No one challenged him directly, but doubt had entered the room, and doubt spreads faster than fire in rigid systems. They want us to disperse, Tarev said. Based on what data? An officer asked. Based on absence. No one answered immediately, because suddenly everything looked different. Back on Helios Gate, Mireia finally moved. Prepare Phase 2. The words were quiet, but they changed everything. Kyle turned instantly. Mom, we're already inside critical threshold. Yes, if we trigger Phase 2 now. We don't trigger it, she interrupted. We reveal it. That answer landed harder than expected. Open channel. To the Dominion? Yes. Transmission lines stabilized. Every officer on the deck watched, because this was the first direct human communication since the surrender. Mireia stepped forward. Her face appeared across every Dominion command frequency. Calm, still, unshaken. Unknown command authority, she began. No title, no recognition, no submission. We understand your current position. Pause. You entered this system expecting resistance. Another pause. You prepared for conflict. Silence. Then, we removed it. The deck behind her remained perfectly still. No movement, no fear, just presence. Your fleet mass is unsustainable within this environment. No threats, no emotion, just fact. You are now operating inside a closed resource field. Another pause. And then, we recommend immediate withdrawal. On the Dominion flagship, no one spoke. The message ended, but its weight remained. Heavy, precise, unavoidable. The human hadn't threatened them, hadn't insulted them, hadn't even claimed superiority. She had simply described reality, and that was worse, because it removed the illusion of control. The deck fell silent. Tarev Kol stared at the projection, then at the human transmission log, then back at his fleet, still massive, still powerful, still trapped. And for the first time, he did not see victory. He saw containment. What unsettled them most was they had not been lured into battle. They had been allowed to enter a system that no longer belonged to war. Kyle exhaled slowly. They won't leave. No, Mireia said. They can't. Lena looked at her. So what happens now? Mireia watched the red mass flicker, ever so slightly. Energy strain, formation tension, command delay. They stay, she said quietly. And the system finishes what we started. No one moved, because now they understood. This was never a battle, never a defense, never even a war in the traditional sense. This was something far more human, controlled, patient, unforgiving. A strategy built not on destruction, but on inevitability. And out there, the most powerful invasion force ever assembled had already lost. They just hadn't accepted it yet. By hour 27, the Dominion stopped pretending everything was under control. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic failure, no explosion, no visible catastrophe, just hesitation, tiny delays between commands, fractional pauses in formation adjustments, energy redistribution cycles taking longer than they should. To an untrained eye, nothing had changed. But to command, everything had. Executor, we are now operating below projected sustainment thresholds. Tarev Kol didn't respond immediately. He was watching the outer edges of his fleet, not the core, not the command ships, the edges, because that's where truth always shows first. Several smaller vessels had begun micro-adjustments, not enough to break formation, but enough to suggest something dangerous, independent thinking. What unsettled them most was not depletion, it was the loss of certainty. Report full consumption curve, Tarev ordered. A projection expanded. Cold numbers filled the air, and for the first time since entering the system, the math didn't favor them. If current compression is maintained, the analyst said carefully, fleet-wide operational degradation begins in 9 hours. And if we disperse? Temporary stabilization, followed by loss of command cohesion. Silence. No one moved, because both options meant the same thing: loss. "They've reached the decision wall," Kyle said. Mireya nodded once. "Yes, they either split or collapse together." "Yes, and either way, they lose." That changed the deck, because now it wasn't theory anymore, it was timing. Lena crossed her arms, watching the red mass flicker. "Some of them are already thinking about breaking formation." Mireya's eyes narrowed slightly. "Good." Kyle looked at her. "You want them to split now?" "No." "Then why?" "Because doubt is more dangerous than action." That answer landed harder than expected. Hour 29. The first unauthorized maneuver happened. A mid-tier Dominion carrier broke formation, not dramatically, not aggressively, just a slight deviation. A search vector, looking for resources that didn't exist. The reaction from command was immediate. "Return to formation." No response. "Return to formation." Delay. Then compliance. But something had changed. The illusion of perfect control was gone. And once that breaks, it never fully returns. Back on Helios Gate, no one celebrated. No one smiled. No one relaxed. Because this part of the plan was the most dangerous. "They're unstable now," Kyle said. "Yes, that makes them unpredictable." Mireya finally looked at him. "No, that makes them human." No one answered immediately, because suddenly everything looked different. The third human move. "Prepare final phase," Mireya said. The words were quiet, but they carried finality. Kyle felt it instantly. "Ma'am," she didn't look at him. "Open all deep field relays. Those are still hidden." "Not anymore." That changed the deck. "Commander, if we reveal those, they'll understand the trap." "Yes, and they might react violently." "Yes, then why?" "Because now we want them to understand." That answer landed harder than expected. The reveal across the solar system, dormant structures woke up. Not weapons, not fleets, something far worse. Gravitational distorters, hidden for decades, buried in asteroid fields, anchored in dead space corridors. Invisible until activated, one by one, they came online, and the system shifted, not violently, not dramatically, but enough to alter escape vectors, enough to bend warp exits, enough to make leaving exponentially harder. The moment, everything broke on the Dominion flagship. Alarms triggered, executor, navigation instability detected, warp exit corridors collapsing, external gravitational interference confirmed. Tariv Cole didn't move because he understood immediately. They hadn't just entered a trap. The trap had just closed. The deck fell silent. No one moved. Even command forgot to speak. The final understanding. "They knew we would stay together," Tariv said slowly. No one answered. "They needed us to stay dense." Still silence. "They removed the system," his voice lowered, "and turned it into a cage. What unsettled them most was they had done exactly what the humans needed." Back on Helios Gate, Kyle stared at the shifting map, escape routes bending, fleet density locking against itself, energy strain compounding. "They can't leave," he said. "No," Mireya replied. "They can't fight. No, they can't sustain. No." He looked at her. "So this is it." Mireya watched the red mass begin to flicker unevenly, not from damage, from imbalance, from collapse starting internally. "This is the moment they understand," she said. And then she didn't look away. "They decide how they end." The silence returned, but now it wasn't empty. It was heavy, final, because out there, the most powerful invasion force in recorded history had just realized they were already inside the ending. The moment collapse became visible, it became irreversible. There was no explosion marking the end, no final strike, no decisive blow, only a quiet, spreading failure. Across the Dominion fleet, ships began to lose synchronization entirely. Energy starvation forced impossible decisions: shields or propulsion, communication or life support, cohesion or survival. They had entered as a single overwhelming force. Now they were alone, one by one, and that was something they had never been designed to face. On the flagship, Tariv Cole no longer looked at the outer formations. He looked at the internal feed, at the requests. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Priority overrides, emergency reroutes, command challenges. All things that should not exist inside a Dominion structure. All things that now existed, because control was no longer absolute. It was conditional. Executor, we cannot maintain full command authority, one officer said, voice tight. Units are beginning to prioritize self-preservation. Tarev did not react, because this was the final stage. Not destruction, not defeat. Fragmentation, and fragmentation was permanent. They are not disobeying, he said quietly. No one answered. They are adapting. That changed the deck, because adaptation without unity is collapse. Another report came in. Multiple ships have entered critical failure attempting forced exit vectors. Navigation collapse confirmed in outer escape attempts. Energy depletion accelerating beyond predictive models. The numbers no longer mattered, because the outcome was already written. What unsettled them most was, there was no enemy left to fight. Back on Helios Gate, the room remained silent. No cheering, no relief, only observation, because this part mattered. Not the victory, the understanding. Kyle watched as more Dominion ships broke away, only to stall, drift, or burn themselves out trying to escape a system that refused to release them. They're destroying themselves, he said. Mireia finally spoke. No, a pause. They're revealing themselves. That answer landed harder than expected. Lena exhaled slowly. They came as one force. Yes, now they are what they always were, Mireia said. Individuals, pretending to be something larger. No one answered immediately, because suddenly everything looked different. Out there, the myth of invincibility was dissolving. Not through force, but through truth. A fleet built on certainty had entered a situation that required doubt, and it couldn't survive it. Hours passed, then more. The red on the screen didn't disappear. It dimmed, ships going dark, systems failing, command signals fading, until what remained was no longer an armada. It was debris, not from battle, but from failure. On the Dominion flagship, Tarev Cole stood alone, not physically, but in certainty. The officers around him still existed, the system still functioned, the ship still held together, but the Dominion, the idea of it, had already broken. They did not defeat us, one officer said quietly, almost trying to reclaim something. Tarev's gaze didn't move. No, he said. A long pause followed. Then, they removed the conditions under which we could exist. The deck fell silent. No one moved, because there was nothing left to say. No counter, no recovery, no reversal, only realization. Back on Helios Gate, Mireia watched the final signals fade. Her posture never changed, her expression never shifted. There was no triumph in her eyes, only confirmation. Kyle looked at her. It's over. Mireia shook her head slightly. No. A pause. It was over the moment they arrived. No one answered immediately, because that truth settled deeper than victory. Fear and danger are not always the same thing, and humanity had understood the difference. They had not fought the Dominion. They had removed the need to. They had not destroyed the enemy. They had made the enemy incompatible with survival, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy something far more unsettling than power. Restraint, precision, understanding. Because suddenly everything looked different. Humanity did not win by being stronger. Humanity won by deciding what the war would be and making sure the enemy could not survive inside it. The system remained quiet, empty, cold, but not broken, never broken, because it had done exactly what it was meant to do, end the invasion, without ever becoming a battlefield. And far beyond the silent remains of the Dominion fleet, the message spread, not through words, not through threats, but through absence, through silence, through the memory of a force that arrived certain and disappeared uncertain. And that was something no species would ever forget. And if you're human, subscribe, leave your like, and comment below. Humanity stands.